Hey everybody, Trevor here, and today we're going to go through how identity stitching can work in Trevor with Data. So to show you how this all kind of comes together for the latest blog post, I've got some event data here in BigQuery, and you can see I've got event IDs with some device type IDs like Android and iPad and iPhones and laptops. And then I've also got some identity map data, and you can see an identity map is where we actually map those identities into a customer ID. Now, most folks kind of have this in some form or other in their warehouse, but today we're going to show you how you can use what you have in your warehouse already, kind of a bring your own identity map situation, and pull that into Trevor with Data and have it applied in an ongoing and retroactive fashion. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new kind of data set that I haven't shown you before called an identity map. It's a special kind of data set that allows you to pull in these identity relationships and have them applied to event data. Okay, you can see in that data set that I have my customer identity map. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to grab all the fields in there. I'm going to use mirror. That's the only way you can do this with identity maps. And for my unique identifier field, we're going to use cookie ID and updated at for the row version. And when I go to the next screen, rather than selecting event or lookup, I'm going to select identity map. And identity map essentially allows me to say, here's the primary ID, the ID that I'm going to use as a basis for looking up other IDs. And then I'm going to add in cascading logic. So that means my first most preferred ID is going to be my customer ID. And then if that doesn't exist, I'm going to grab the email. And then if that doesn't exist, we'll just fall back to what that primary ID is. So that gives me a rich way of kind of combining whatever information I have or whatever IDs I have together to give me the most holistic view possible. So let's hit next. And I'll give this a name. We'll just call it my stitching example ID map. And we'll leave it as a manual sync for now and hit create dataset. Awesome. Now, while that's syncing, let's go ahead and walk through how you create a data group to include these identity maps. Heading over to data groups, you can see I've already got one where I've got my stitching data where stitching has not been applied, so we can compare that later. But let's create a new one where stitching is applied. So let's say stitching example applied. And if you remember from the last video, this is how you created a data group, and I've got all my data sets listed here. I'm going to select that stitching example events, and you'll notice that there's a switch here to turn stitching on for this data set specifically. And it allows me to pick from the various identity maps that I've brought in before. In this case, I've got a stitching example ID map. That's the one that we just created. And you'll see that there's also a replay mechanism. I can do manually replay, or I can do this on a schedule from 1 hour up to every 7 days. We're going to leave it to manual for now, and we're going to create it. Awesome. Now, while that's backfilling, let's jump over and look at the data that we have in our stitching not applied example. Okay, so here I am in a notebook looking at our stitching not applied data set just to see the raw events. And when I drag in the person ID, and I'll grab a couple metrics here. Let's grab event count and revenue. We can see there's a bunch of, device level identifiers in here that are not yet combined. They each have a bunch of different events. And if I drag in the unique users metric, you'll also see that each one of these distinct kind of device level identifiers is counting as a unique person. You can say I've got 9 total people here. Okay, that's a problem. So let's talk about how the identity map data set actually works and what that does to the data. So jumping back over to our BigQuery data set here, you can see I've got some mappings in my warehouse here that show which cookie IDs should be mapped to what person identity. Now, I've got this Mike Android, Mike laptop. Those are getting mapped to customer 002. They also have an email associated with them, but since there's this customer ID, it should show this one because that's my preferred identity. If same thing with Sarah, just with customer 001. But you can see with Emma, there is no customer ID yet. Maybe she hasn't created an account or something. but she does have an email. So for any of the devices that have those identifiers, if I look at the stitching applied, I should see those show up rather than these cookie IDs. So let's jump back over. Now let's switch our data group over to the stitching example applied to see what happens. Okay, cool. You can see right away that some of the cookies were combined. I now see customer 001 and 002. I've got this Emma since that was the best ID that we had. I also have some data in here that didn't show up in our identity map, like this anonymous cookie or the Sarah iPhone. Those, since we didn't have an identity map, those came across as is. And you see that the number of unique users has now been reduced to 6 from 9, which is great. This means that stitching is working. Now, here's the thing though. When I get new data, or even more, when I update the identity map to include retroactive changes to identities, I need that to come through. So let me show you how, by updating the identity map dataset in my warehouse, that cascades all the way through and stitches the data here in Trevor with Data. So let's head back over to BigQuery. Okay, I've got a query here that's going to add a couple of mappings into my identity map. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to add in an updated identity for Emma's laptop to customer 003, as well as Emma's iPad. So that should help us combine this stuff together. Let's go ahead and run that query. Awesome. Now, after that query's run, I can now see, let me refresh this table. I can now see that all of my devices now have a customer identity and an email. So that should significantly change what I see in Trevor with Data. So let's head back over. Now, in order for these identity map changes to apply, two things have to happen. First, I need to make sure that the identity map is updated. So I'm going to sync that identity map dataset to pull in the latest changes that I got. That could mean changes to existing rows, but also changes to net new rows that I've got. Awesome. Now that my identity map is done syncing, let's head over to my data group and let's apply the changes that we just made to the stitching algorithm through replay. So one of the cool things, you can do replay automatically like I showed before, but I can also just trigger it right now and have it apply it. So let's go ahead and hit the replay. What it's doing is it's taking the net new rows I got in my identity map and backwards applying them to all of my historical data in my data group so that everything is up to date, even the historical data. Awesome. Now that that's done, let's head back over to Analyze. Okay, here I am. Now, when I refresh this report, it should show some different stuff. I shouldn't see this email anymore because Emma got a customer ID, and I shouldn't see Sarah iPhone anymore because that should be mapped to the new customer 003. So let's refresh it. Awesome. Now you can see that it worked. I've got 5 unique users instead of 9 or 6 like I had before the refresh. All of those anonymous IDs are now reconciled. I've got these 3 customer IDs that my identity map was updated to, and I can see the different revenue amounts and things that I'm getting. Awesome. If I do a device type, I can break this down. I can see that customer 003 actually had 2 devices, whereas it used to be just 1, which is awesome. You can see some of their devices had a purchase and other devices didn't. That's super critical because if I wanted to know that they saw some marketing activity on the laptop and then made a purchase on an iPad, I can now connect that together where I wasn't able to do that before. The last thing I'll show you is that even segments that are person level now use this enriched information a lot better. So when I drag this onto my table here, I can now see I've got all 3 of these customers here included in this segment because they made a purchase. And I'm including all of their device behavior, even the devices that didn't have a purchase because they've all been stitched together. So that's identity stitching working end to end based on an identity map that you bring yourself from your warehouse, and we just keep it up to sync. Pretty cool in my opinion. So anyway, good luck out there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.